All right. Thank you all for joining Microsoft and Revanti today for this exclusive two-part series focused on achieving AI enhanced productivity and data security. We truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to engage with Revanti and Microsoft. A little bit about Revanti. Revanti is a Microsoft partner that has a team packed with expertise in all things Microsoft. The team at Revanti is ready to help organizations deliver a more collaborative, more productive, and more secure experience. A few housekeeping items. This is a live event that is being recorded. We will be sharing the recording with each of you. If you have questions on any of the content presented today, feel free to enter them into the Q&A chat, and our team will take action to answer them. Our speakers for this two-part series. We have two Johns from Microsoft, John Horner and John Studsrud. And Yesai. These gentlemen come loaded with a deep wealth of knowledge around Microsoft's tools and its impact on end users. And I know you will walk away with more insights on Microsoft 365 Copilot and Microsoft information protection capabilities by the time this is over. All right, enough for me. I'm about to cough. Yesai, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Shane, and thank you everybody for being here. We're super excited to be here. We have a lot of content for you guys, so we really appreciate everybody being here. So first wanted to start off with a quick agenda. So we'll start out by providing an overview and objective of our webinar for today. So we'll talk about what we're going to kind of cover today in our part one of our webinar series. We'll start with a introduction to Microsoft 365 Copilot. We'll talk about Copilot chat as well and some of the capabilities and differences. We'll also look at how you can boost productivity and really increase your collaboration using Microsoft 365 Copilot. Then we'll get into kind of the security and privacy considerations with AI. How do you secure those major pillars in Microsoft 365, which includes identities, devices, data, how to provide security at all layers? Because if you're not aware, obviously, Microsoft 365 Copilot inherits all that security you have within your tenant. So it's very important. So I'm going to come back and talk a lot about that. And I'm going to talk about how you can secure all those pillars using the tools and capabilities available within the Microsoft 365 stack. We'll, of course, have some demos throughout the process. I'll have some demos. There'll be additional demos throughout the webinar. So we're excited to show you some of the things that we're mentioning. Then we'll talk about what's next, what are some next steps, how Revanti can help you in your Microsoft 365 Copilot journey, how we can help you take those next steps. We'll also have a time for some Q&A. If you have any questions, like Shane mentioned, please feel free to provide them, and we'll be more than glad to address that. And we'll also talk about our next webinar, what we're going to cover in our next webinar, which will be part 2 of our webinar series, where we'll dive more into also Copilot agents and a lot more other details. So we're super excited for both webinars. We really appreciate you being here, and let's get started. So just a quick overview and objective of today's webinar. We'll give you, like I mentioned, we'll give you an intro and preparation for Microsoft 365 Copilot. We'll talk about Copilot and what Copilot is, obviously, and we'll talk about also Copilot chat. I know John Horner coming up will have a lot of details and information about that. We'll also talk about how you boost productivity, creativity with Microsoft 365 Copilot. So some examples of using Copilot in the environment, and also using Copilot chat and some of the differences there. So we'll talk heavily about those as well. And then security and privacy, very important, near and dear to my heart. Security is top of line for anything that's being deployed. You want to deploy Copilot, you want to deploy it responsibly, right? So it's very important that you identify, go through all those major pillars, really look at your tenant as a whole and make sure all the pillars are properly secure prior to a Copilot rollout. So we'll talk about a lot about that. So I'll be handing the mic real shortly to John Horner, who will kind of kick things off for us, and then I'll be back and I'll talk about the security and privacy aspects of rolling out Copilot. So thank you again all for being here, and the floor is yours, John.
Thank you, Yesai. Give me a second as I switch over and let's share my screen here. So We talk about Copilot and Copilot for Microsoft 365, and one of the things we always like to build out there, it's built on our comprehensive approach of security, compliance, privacy, and responsible AI. So there are some things with responsible AI that Microsoft does. It's all about the large language model not being trained off of your data. It is a pre-trained model that we bring into production inside of your service boundary, and we'll never learn anything new after it's been put into production. Everything it's learned, it already knows, and we're training its little brother, if you will, that replaces it pretty periodically. But security, compliance, privacy, all very, very important. And that's what we're mainly going to be here to talk about today. I'm going to talk about a little bit about Copilot, and towards the end, I'm going to hand it over to Yasai to talk about the tools that we have in Microsoft 365 E3 or G3 for my government customers, my GCC customers that have joined, and how the tools there are there to protect that data. Because when we bring Microsoft 365 Copilot into place, there really aren't any controls inside of Copilot that limit it to what it has access to. The model has access, Microsoft 365 Copilot has native access to your data, native secure access to your data. So how do we then control what Copilot has access to? We control what I have access to as a user. It's all about the access the user has because I power Copilot in that scenario. As we look into this now, Copilot itself can be confusing. We have a Copilot for everything. Think of Copilot as Microsoft's brand for artificial intelligence, and maybe even more so as Microsoft's user interface into that artificial intelligence. So we have a partnership with OpenAI. Everybody's aware of that. We've given them a lot of money, and we've taken what we've learned from that partnership and brought it into the large language models that we put into Copilot. So they're loosely based on ChatGPT-4, etc., as a base model. Then each of these different Copilots perform a different function, so we add additional training on top of that model for it to do that function. For example, something like we have in Copilot for GitHub. This is about coders, helping coders write code. That has different additional training than Copilot for security has. Copilot for security is there to help admins inside of the Security Admin Center. Now, for my government, my GCC customers that are here today, most of this wheel is not available for us. We have just a few things. So first off, we have the modern work component, this little pie piece down here. This has been available since December. This is Microsoft 365 Copilot, Copilot that natively has access to your data. Commercial customers, we've had this for longer than since December. What is coming? So what I'm going to talk about is kind of the announcement or what's coming for my government customers today. There is the Copilot chat capability, the browser-based capability that does not have access to internal data. So that is this browser piece as well as this little piece up here. This is coming for GCC customers. They've been in our commercial customers for a while. So what I'm going to talk about here relates to both of them, but I really want to let my GCC customers know, what does this mean as this is rolling out? Let me get rid of my pen, and matter of fact, while I'm at it, I'm going to erase my ink, and let's go on to my next slide here. So, I didn't want to build this all the way completely. I wanted this already completely built out, but it's not, and that's okay. I'm going to build it out here, and then we'll talk about it. So, again, I mentioned 90 different Copilots, but blessing or the curse of Microsoft, there's always more than one way to do things, more than one way to accomplish things. So as we're looking at, we want to bring AI into our organization. Now we talk about how much do we want to build it and how much do we want to leverage something that's already built. So with Azure AI Studio, we can leverage Azure OpenAI models and create our own large language model. We could create something that we can then train on our data for a specific task that we want it to do. All the Copilots that we're creating and offering are stuff that Microsoft has pre-trained to perform a function for you. If you want to build something to perform a function, that's where Azure AI Studio comes into play. Microsoft 365 Copilot, remember, not trained off of your data in any way, shape, or form. So if you want to train it on your data, Azure AI Studio. Next up, something called Copilot Studio, low code, no code capabilities to build a chatbot that can be leveraged both internally and externally. So how do we accomplish this? So when we're looking at something like Copilot Studio, historically, when we created a chatbot, we needed to provide answers to map out to possible questions that people would ask. If we would have a mapped out a response 1 to question 1. So somebody asks question 1, they get the mapped out response to question 1. They ask question 2, they get the mapped out response to question 2. If they ask question X that we don't have a mapped out response to, they don't get a result. With artificial intelligence now, we have the ability inside of Copilot Studio, when we're creating these bots, that we just point them at sources of information. So the example I'm going to use today is for the city of Bellevue, Washington. They have it available on their website. They have a chatbot that they've created on their website. I'm not going to leverage it because I'm going to kind of show you how you could build one and test it out. But I'll tell you why this is a more beneficial way. Their search index says, how do I? Very great. How do I pay my water bill? Ask it a question, how do I pay my water bill? I click go, but it acts like it's a search result. So it brings back search results, just like we would in Bing or Google. So I have to go determine which one of these answer my question. With Copilot Studio, within our ability to point it at knowledge bases or knowledge sources, as I'm creating this bot, and this isn't their production bot, this is just a test thing I have going on, and I'm able to leverage their website because it's a public-facing website. They want people to come to it. I add a knowledge source, public website, SharePoint, etc. In our session next week, my colleague John Studgery that's on the call is going to dive deeper into these types of things, but I wanted to kind of show this real quick that I was able to add a public website as the knowledge source. So I don't have to map out question and answers anymore. I just point the artificial intelligence to say, hey, here's the information you can answer users' questions with. And now when I ask that question, how do I pay my water bill? Artificial intelligence will go scan those knowledge sources that I've listed. And it's going to scan the City of Bellevue's public-facing website, and it's going to determine that it found the answer there, and here's the answer. So rather than being a search result, I have to go find out which is the correct result. It gives me the answer. There's 5 ways to pay your water bill. And oh, by the way, these are the specific places that I found the answer to your question. I combined this information to give you your answer. And if I click here, it'll show me Bellevue's website that says, here's my 5 payment options. It's a better result for a human being, because if we think about all this artificial intelligence that we're bringing into place, what is it really all about? Can I save a human being time? Help them find the answer to the question quicker than they would with a traditional search result. Now, the next thing up the chain is we decide, no, we want to leverage pre-built things. And this is really what we're here to talk about, is the Microsoft 365 Copilot and Copilot Chat. So Microsoft 365 Copilot, that large language model that was brought into play and has access to your data. So when we're leveraging that large language model and we're leveraging what's called Microsoft 365 Copilot, for my commercial customers that are here, you are probably aware of this work in web tab. For my GCC customers, my government customers, we don't have work in web tab yet because the web piece, this is strictly chat that doesn't have access to my data. That's coming, between now and late May is when it's coming. Work, have access to my work data, has access to everything that I have permissions on. This is where I can ask it to do things like summarize my email. And it will go look at my inbox and come back and tell me, hey, you've got these emails inside of your mailbox. And then I can click on them, go look at them, helps me understand what's inside my mailbox. Now, later on, we might talk a little bit more about things like prompt engineering, the fact that we want to have a goal, context, source, and expectations into these prompts that we're putting into Copilot. We want you to have a goal. What am I trying to do? What is my context? Why am I trying to do it? What is the source? Where should I look for this information to help me address what I'm trying to do? And what are my expectations? How should you return those results to me? The better we can ask that question, the better the response will be that we're getting. But this is Microsoft 365 Copilot that has access to the data inside of our tenant. Now let me build this out. So Copilot chat then, what is that? This is what's coming from my GCC tenants. It's been around for commercial for a while now. This is included with your licensing. You don't have to purchase additional licensing. Microsoft 365 Copilot requires additional licensing. This is included licensing. It's going to be coming. So what does that mean then? And what do we talk about when we talk about data security, all of that? So here, because it's not available in GCC tenants, I'm showing it to us in a commercial tenant. This browser has, if I go to Copilot, it's going to pop in and it's going to have me access to what we call Copilot chat. This is the large language model, and the large language model only powering it, but also the ability to pull information from the internet if we allow that. So inside of commercial tenants, when we see this, we don't see a little message here that says web grounding is turned off because we haven't done that. In government tenants, if I go out there today and I log in, I want to go to Copilot. I go to copilot.microsoft.com, as everybody kind of goes. There's different URLs that we get redirected to now. If we authenticate with our Entra identity, our government identity, we'll get a page that looks like this. Hey, you want to use it for work? You want to use it for personal? If I click that I want to use it for personal, then I will get an experience like this. Hey, John, what's on your mind? How does it know it's John? Because I'm signed in with my Hotmail email address. But it's important to understand that this is a consumer version of that Copilot chat and does not have the data protection capabilities that we have going on in enterprise. If I click over here and I say, go log in for work, now it's going to log me into a different URL. Notice copilot.microsoft.com versus m365cloud.microsoft.com. When it finally gets there, it will pop up and show me this experience. It's going to have, number one, it looks different. The look and feel of this is different. So for my government customers and for my commercial customers, it's important for you to educate your users. If you get to Copilot and it looks like what we have showing on the right, that's the wrong Copilot. That's the consumer Copilot. If it looks like we have showing on the left, that's the right Copilot. This gear here, enterprise data protection, that is there, letting you know that Copilot lives by the rules you already have in place inside of your tenant. There's no data security controls we put in Copilot. Copilot's brought into production inside your service boundary, there to live by the rules you already have in place. So your permission models, your sensitivity labels, all of those things, Copilot's aware of them and will live by those rules. But web search, your organization has turned web search off. My government customers in the GCC tenant, when this becomes available, they're going to see that web search has been turned off. If you would like to turn web search on, very easy to do so. You just go to your cloud service policy and you're going to say, well, where do I find my cloud service policy? Well, inside of the admin center, you will see the controls. Now, in my commercial customers that are here, when you go to Copilot inside the admin center, you're going to notice more features here. You're going to notice more features in the overview. You're going to notice a more robust reporting capability. Those aren't quite there in GCC yet. There's another little robust thing coming, and there's also a GitHub solution that can give us some Power BI reporting to give us some deep dive usage into how things are going. When we click on the settings tab, commercial customers will see more things here because there's more features in commercial. Government customers, we're still rolling those out. But at the very bottom of both, web search for Copilot. This will get us to that cloud service policy where we can create a policy that says, hey, we're going to allow some or all of our users to have access to the internet. Now, when we have access to the internet, bear in mind, never does anything get placed onto the internet. If I'm doing a search and I include Yesai's personal information inside of that search, Copilot nor any other large language model, ChatGPT, Gemini, whatever, they don't go make a website that says, hey, this is Yesai's personal information. Doesn't happen. We never place any information on the internet. We're only pulling information from the internet. So turn this on and then I go, hey, scope, what do I want it to be? Well, I can be for everybody, or I could say, you know what? Just a certain group of people do I want to have access to the internet when I'm doing this. But when I move into my policy, then you're going to look at all these things and go, okay, which of these is the right thing? Because there's a lot of them here. The easiest way to really find that is let's just search for web. So we search for web, and that comes up, allow web search in Copilot. So we click allow web search in Copilot. So why is my GCC tenant not allowing web search in Copilot? Because I haven't configured this setting. If I want to configure the setting, then I enable it. And when I enable it, I can enable it and say, you know what? It's enabled for both Copilot and Copilot chat. Or it's disabled for both Copilot and Copilot chat. Or it's disabled for Copilot work mode, but enabled for Copilot personal mode. We have these settings that we can set. I'm not going to set mine because then I can't come in and show this in future demos, but I want to point that out, that when this included one comes, it's just going to be the large language model, no access to any data whatsoever. But it's eventually going to have, you can turn on access to the internet. So let's get rid of all these little things I've got popped up here, and let's talk a little bit about next. Now, with Copilot Chat, this is where next week, John Studge is going to talk more about these agents and the way we give people access to other data, because the Copilot Chat I just talked about has no access to internal information. So how do we give them access to internal information? I talked down here about how do I create a chatbot on a public-facing website. Next week, we're going to talk more about how do I create an agent that can help me pull information internally and why we would want to pull information internally. So moving on. My GCC customers, government customers, you should have gotten a message center post about a month ago talking about beginning to be mid-April, we're going to roll this feature set out. Well, we put an update in there on April 16th saying that we're kind of still preparing, but we feel that the rollout will be complete by mid-May rather than the end of April. So it's rolling out now. And if we talk about rolling feature sets out, even in commercial, this works this way, but I want to talk about it in GCC tenants because they're always like, hey, you said it would be here by mid-April. It's not here. Well, when we roll out things into these tenants, we roll them out in chunks, in phases, if you will. So the first 5% of tenants will get it in that first kind of wave or phase that lasts about a week or two maybe. And we do it to 5% to make sure that when we roll it out, nothing happens that makes us have to pull it back. Because it's easier for me to pull it back from 5% of tenants than 100% of tenants. So it goes to 5% first for a week or two, making sure things are running smoothly. Then we go to like 50% of tenants, again for a week or two to make sure it's rolling out smoothly. Then it goes to 100%. So I often get questions about why can't you just tell me it's coming April 16th, for example, because we don't turn it on for everybody at the same time because we want to make sure nothing gets messed up as we're rolling out. So we roll it out in phases. So it's coming here. That message center post does have some information about policies and things that we have. Some apps are going to show up. Now, this could scare you. Hey, you're telling me that Copilot's going to show up in different areas. Well, yeah, it does, but it is not giving access to anything again. So let's look at a couple things. Let's look at mail and let's look at Teams, because these are the big things where that Copilot app is going to show up for those Copilot chat users. It shows up there. Well, what does it show up there as? It doesn't show up there as the ability or grant me access to email or anything like that. It just shows up there on the side of the window. And when it does, when I click on that, it presents that chat experience from the web browser to me inside of Outlook. So again, if I asked it to summarize my email and I typed that horribly bad, sure, I can help with that. just paste the version of that email into here and I'll be able to summarize it for you. It does not give it access to any of your email. We're just presenting that inside. Same thing with Copilot. When we're inside of Copilot, we're going to see where's my Copilot blade? We see Copilot, we pop over, we get into that. Just is presenting that experience inside of Teams. It's not giving access to any Teams information. Now, if I come back here, commercial tenants, if you're a Microsoft 365 Copilot licensed user, you see a work tab and a web tab. If you are a Copilot chat user, the included version, you don't see this because you don't have both versions of it. What you really have is web, but you don't see that it's only web. You just see one experience. My GCC tenants today, you just see one experience. You don't see the tab because all you have available today is Microsoft 365 Copilot if you purchased it. So what does that mean? How are things differ? Now this is, I'm kind of, maybe giving a precursor to the things that John Studge is going to talk about next week, but it's all about having access to data. So Microsoft 365 Copilot licensed user today in my demo tenant, somebody is wondering, what is our time off policy? So what is our time off policy? And I'm going to copy this so I don't have to type it 3 more times. But Microsoft 365 Copilot licensed user, powered by me as a user, has access to everything I have access to as a user, so it can scan in this area all of my email, all of the SharePoint sites I have access to, all of my OneDrive documents, all the Teams things I have access to, etc. It's able to go out and search the tenant and come back and say, you know what? I found a document here, Contoso time off vacation policies. It's located in a SharePoint site. It's out here on a SharePoint site that you have access to. So here is the answer to your question. If I'm in the web, if I'm in that free included version that has no access to my internal information, I ask that same question and I get a generic response. You know what? Time off policies vary widely. Depends on what it could be. Now, this version of it, I have turned on access to the internet. So it says, where did it find this answer? It pulled it from these websites. And if I click on them, it'll show me I pulled it from Indeed.com, talking about things. But it's generic information about time off policies. It's not giving me what my time off policy is for the organization that I am a part of. And now my browser just went blank on me. There we go. So let's get back here. So then how could I give that Copilot chat user, without spending the money to give them a Microsoft 365 Copilot license, how could I give that user access to some of that internal information? This is what John Studge is going to talk more about next week, is I can create an agent in Copilot. Here I've created an HR assistant agent. And what I've done on the back end of this, to its knowledge base, I give it access to just that HR information to address HR questions. So now that user can ask that question of that agent, and it will provide the same answer that my Microsoft 365 Copilot licensed user got. So Copilot chat is coming. I don't want my government customers to be worried about it. And same thing with our commercial customers. Again, it doesn't give access to anything that the user doesn't have access to. I have to, the Copilot chat cannot summarize my emails unless I paste it in there. It doesn't have access to anything. Let me go back here to Copilot and let's start a new chat again on that web experience. What I can do, or I'm able to do with this, is in commercial, I can attach a file, add content. In GCC tenants, this will not be available right away. You're not going to be able to attach files, things like that. But it's coming. So let me come into ready to find a file that I'm going to upload, and let's upload. I can't do that one. Let's do this one, Readiness and Adoption Guide for Public Sector. I'm attaching it, and I'm going to ask it to Summarize this file. Oops, it's got to finish uploading first, or attaching, if you will. Summarize this file. So I gave it access to this internal information. Now Copilot can summarize this file for me. This is what this file is all about. But where did that file go when I attached it? Where did it go to? Well, if we're using some of the consumer products, I don't know where it goes to. ChatGPT, I don't know where it goes to. Gemini, I don't know where it goes to. Here, Copilot Chat, I know exactly where it goes to. It goes to my OneDrive for Business. So let me open a new tab. Actually, let's go here. And I'm going to go out to, I don't have OneDrive open, so let's go here. Go to OneDrive for Business of this user. So inside of OneDrive for Business, every one of us now have a folder called Microsoft Copilot Chat Files. And if I open that, we will see right here, this Microsoft 365 Readiness Guide. This is what I just uploaded about a minute ago. But notice it has a 2 behind it, because on March 15th, I uploaded this file and did it. And on April 14th, I uploaded this file and did it. So when I upload this file, attach it, what I'm doing is I am temporarily granting Copilot access to that internal information. And I can continue explaining chapter 4 in more detail, and it will do that for me. I can continue having a conversation about this file to help me understand this file. But once I start a new chat, Copilot no longer has access to that data. It's back to only having access to what we've given it access to. It's either just the large language model, or it's the large language model and the internet to pull and provide, answers for users. With that, I think I am kind of getting close to the end of what I want to talk about, but I want to continue on here, and maybe I'll even address right now if there's any questions coming in. I don't see many in the Q&A, but does anybody have any specific questions kind of about how Copilot Chat differs from Microsoft 365 Copilot? If we have time towards the end of the session, maybe we can do some more demos talking about summarizing emails and creating emails and stuff like that. But Copilot's been around for a while, so people probably understand that. What we really want to do is talk about, as we get to this, I really want people to understand that what's coming, this chat area, and I didn't get a chance to change my green font here like I promised I was going to, because we know this is kind of not great, is that it's just the large language model. If we turn it on, we want access to the internet, we can. Microsoft 365 Copilot, the large language model, and access to organizational data. But again, access to the data only I have access to. Now, as we're going to talk here in a little bit, when I hand back over to you, Sai, to talk about some of the data control things with Microsoft 365 E3 and G3, some of us over time have kind of gotten to relying on what I call security through obscurity. John doesn't realize that he has access to this file, so John never searches for that file, and John never finds the information in that file that he never should have had access to in the first place because somebody accidentally shared it with him. Copilot, knowing everything about my permissions inside the tenant, fully knows that I have access to that information, so it will pull it in for me. So permissions, very, very important. Make sure permissions are tied down. Sensitivity labels, make sure sensitivity labels are in place. DLP policies, we didn't really talk about this yet, but I'm going to pull up my slide and talk a little bit more about DLP policies. Why are they important? This little button here called Enterprise Data Protection. This is why the enterprise version of Copilot is better for us as an organization than the personal consumer version of it, because we have data protection built in. We need to live by the rules you have in place. And one of the rules you can create are DLP policies. I have a DLP policy that says this sensitive information should never leave our organization. If it's in an email, if it's in SharePoint document, in OneDrive document, should never leave our organization. Copilot is aware of that. So if my user pastes in a document information inside of here that contains sensitive information, when Copilot then in turn brings in the large language model, Copilot knows, oh, that sensitive information, that I pull off to the side and don't send to the large language model. Because Copilot is kind of an orchestrator between us, our data, and that large language model. We talk about them like they're one and the same, but really it's two components. Copilot is that orchestrator. So we have the ability to have extremely long prompts that we put into Copilot. I'm going to go into my work area here and just put a really long prompt in here that does not necessarily return great results inside of my demo tenant because I don't use it every day. But an example of using a long prompt: act like you are my assistant. Go out and tell me what I've got on my calendar today. Summarize my emails, but only tell me what's important. Summarize my chats, all of this. That we would never put a search like that into a search engine because we would get back very, very useless information, really, or too much information. So one of the things that Copilot does as this orchestration model is takes this huge prompt and pulls smaller search queries out to do some searches. I need to pull a little search out to go search John's calendar for his meetings and search his Outlook inbox for his mail. And I do need to do another search to go search through his Teams chats. And I need to do another search to go through and find information, on the internet. So there's multiple different searches going on. Copilot makes that differentiation and sends those smaller searches to the large language model so it can create them. And when it comes back, Copilot compiles them into the answer. One of the other things Copilot does is that in this prompt, maybe I have included Yesai's social security number for some reason. I'm Yesai's manager, whatever the case may be, I've included social security number in it. Copilot is aware that that's sensitive information because we've created a rule that says social security numbers never leave our tenant. So in its thing, when it's going to pull out information to pull the large language model, it knows to leave that behind. That never goes to the large language model. But as an end user, I don't know that because Copilot's doing this orchestration, sending out the little mini searches to the large language model, compiling it all into an answer, and then adding Yesai's social security number back to it as we bring it in. So it's very, very important that the things that we do as far as security. Now, if I didn't have a DLP policy on that, it's not the end of the world because the large language model's not learning what Yesai's social security number is anyway. So it's not like the next user in my tenant that comes along and asks Copilot an answer. Copilot now knows what Yesai's social security number is, so here you go. But we still want to think about that data security. I had a customer at one point in time tell me, John, Copilot is a tiger. And I said, yeah, it kind of is a tiger. He says, I need to cage that tiger. Well, unfortunately, we can't cage the tiger. We're thinking about it differently. Rather than caging the tiger to control the tiger, we need to cage the data that the tiger eats, control the tiger's food. And that's where we do this. I pulled back up the settings area. Now, this is in a commercial tenant where we see a little bit better health and overview information, etc. But settings are basically the same in both tenants, data security and compliance. I want to leverage this. I want to control Copilot. I pull open that blade and I find out that, oh, I don't control Copilot. It points me to where inside the tenant I control that data and I control what Copilot has access to. With that, we have questions. Put them in the questions. I'm more than happy to help. I'm going to hand it over to Yesai now to talk more about Microsoft 365 E3. Next week, we'll be talking about E5, G5, the advanced capabilities, but talk about how do we secure that data and ultimately, how can Revanti help you set up these securities inside of your tenant so you can sleep easier at night knowing that Copilot has, that John doesn't have access to too much, so neither does Copilot. Go ahead, take it away, Yesai.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. That was an amazing presentation, and appreciate all the insights and everything that you provided. So everything was great. Thank you so much, John. And again, hello, everybody. It's Yesai Julian here and from Revanti. So, John mentioned a lot of things, provided a great overview of what is Copilot, right? He provided us a lot of great information, a lot of great insights into Copilot. And I'm here to talk about, some of the things John mentioned about security, right? So Microsoft, Copilot will inherit the security from your tenant, right? So it's very important that you look across all the pillars, right? So we have 4 major pillars that we want to talk about. In today's webinar, we're going to kind of cover 3 of those pillars, right? And 3 of those pillars include identity, include devices, and includes data, right? Most importantly. So these are very important. And here at Revanti, we really take security as our top priority in any rollout, right? And even as you're looking to roll out, Microsoft 365 Copilot, you want to make sure you provide that security across all the pillars prior to rolling it out, right? And we'll first start off by talking about the identity pillar. Then we'll get into devices and how you can look at your devices, how you can secure your devices, how you provide access to compliant devices, as that's very, very important, right? Prior to rollout, right? Prior to rolling out Copilot and looking even at the data security, you want to look across the pillars prior to that. And then, of course, finally, we'll talk about how you can use Purview to provide that data security. I know, John, you mentioned some great points about, incorporating information protection and sensitivity labeling, incorporating data, data loss prevention. So we're going to cover that. But in today's webinar, we're going to talk about the capabilities available with the E3, Microsoft 365 E3 license. And in part 2 of our webinar, we're going to take it a step further. We're going to go more enhanced. We're going to talk about, some of the E5 capabilities, right? Some of the things in Entra ID protection, user sign-in risk as an example. We'll look at more advanced features in Purview, things like DSPM for AI for oversharing and how to prevent that. We'll talk about how to do, say, insider risk management, and we'll talk about auto labeling capabilities, right? And how you can take labels instead of a manual approach to automatically label them. So we'll kind of talk about that as we proceed. So I talked about identities. Identity is that first major pillar. That's the first pillar that you want to absolutely identify and look at across your tenant, right? Entra ID is your main source and is your main identity and access management system. So it's going to provide you, so if you're not familiar, Entra ID is the main identity and access management system that provides you access to all your external resources. So think of, Microsoft 365, all the products, Word, Outlook, Teams, anything you connect to. Basically, Entra ID provides the identity into those external resources. Now, I'm sure all of you have many different SaaS applications that you have incorporated with Entra ID. You have, you might have other third-party applications, everything integrated into Entra ID. So you want to look at Entra ID as that first platform. It provides that identity into everything else. So it's very important that you take the security of your identities, very seriously. And that's where we come in here at Revanti. We help you identify all of that. We do an overarching, and we'll talk about towards the end of the webinar, we'll talk about how we can help, how we come in and provide you that assessment. And we assess your environment. We look at all your Entra ID and all the different settings and capabilities you have to really protect your identities. And as you can see here, Entra ID, brings all those identities, the human identities, any workload identities, everything from there, brings it all in. And then you use the power of Entra ID and you use the power to basically provide access to all of those external resources. And then, they include your Microsoft 365 app, like I mentioned, and all your other SaaS applications as well. Now, one of my favorite things and one of my favorite components of Entra ID is conditional access. So basically, conditional access allows you to decide how you provide access to those different applications. You specify the different conditions, you specify who can access it, where they can access it from, when they can't access it, how to block access. So there's a lot of power with conditional access, right? So if you're not using it, or if you're using very minimally today, you want to really use the power of conditional access because it brings in that security into your environment. So there's a lot that it can do. In today's webinar, we're going to kind of look at some of the basic capabilities with conditional access. And in part 2 of our webinar, we're going to get into more advanced capabilities. So using the power of Entra ID protection and using things like user risk and sign-in risk, and how Entra ID looks at that to provide access to the user. So it's a lot of machine learning and AI that's in the back end that really provides the signals to Entra ID to tell it whether there's maybe the user signing in is not the actual user, maybe there's a risk involved. So we'll talk more about that in our upcoming webinar. Now, with conditional access, you can provide the conditions and tell it whether you want to allow the access. So as an example, users coming in, signing in from a specific network, or they're signing in from a Mac device, or they're signing in on a browser versus a desktop app. So there's a lot of different conditions. So Entra ID looks at all that sign in and evaluates all of that. And then you create a policy to say, based on all of these conditions, either I'll allow access, either I'll allow access with MFA, or I'll limit access, or I want to force the sign-in, as an example, the session to expire after 1 hour. So depending on the app, depending on the sensitivity of the app, depending on the user, the group of users, it's very, very robust, right? So there's a lot of use cases for how you provide access, and conditional access is a great way for you to do that. So looking at this kind of just quickly maps that out for you, right? It's looking at, like I mentioned, all those, user and location. It's looking at device, and I'm going to slowly talk about coming up about devices and how you secure your devices and how that's important, right? So all of this is very important. And I see, John, you came on. Did you want to add a couple of things?
Yeah, that was my cue to say, hey, I want to add something. So I get a lot of questions like this about, we're talking about artificial intelligence here, John. Why on earth are you talking about MFA? MFA is always the number one most important thing in our tenant as well, because that is our, with Microsoft 365, there's no concept of a VPN really. We just access on the internet. So our identity becomes our VPN. But why is MFA important, and maybe even a little bit more important when we have artificial intelligence, especially Microsoft 365 Copilot? Well, I have access to everything inside my tenant. Copilot has access to it too. So MFA, I liken that to being the 2 locks on my front door. You have to have 2 keys to get in, but if somehow somebody circumvents that and gets inside my house, they still would have to go search my house to find my valuables. Having Copilot is like having a butler always standing at my front door. And now that bad actor got in, they just says, hey, Copilot, go find me all of John's cool stuff. Really, really important here with artificial intelligence. We want to make sure with MFA, conditional access, we are zero trust. I don't trust that it's really you, John. Prove to me it's really you. Okay, I proved to you it's really me. All right, now I'll go ahead and find all your cool stuff for you, John, because I believe it's you. So it's always important, but maybe it ticked up a little bit, and a little notch here with artificial intelligence. And that's kind of what I wanted to add in. So thanks, Isai.
Yeah, thank you, John. No, that's absolutely important. Yeah, it's critical. And to John's point, yeah, your identity is your main source of getting into M365, right? So that's why, you have to evaluate it. You have to look at all your policies. You have to look at all your different settings. How you're providing access is so important. As John mentioned, once you unleash Copilot, right, and if you're not looking at your identities and somebody's able to get into your identity, now they have the power of that user. Once they're in, now they can use that user identity to search across your environment and do things that the normal user is not going to do. That's why it's super critical and important that you look at that. You look at that holistically. And if you're not using it, conditional access is a very critical component. Now, of course, outside of that, we also look at all your different authentication methods, how you provide authentication into your tenant. So things like requiring passwordless, as an example, requiring phishing resistant MFA for any of those sensitive accounts, right? These are absolutely important areas that you want to identify, even for your admins, as an example, right? So your admins are your keys into your kingdom, right? They're the ones that provide all the keys, and they're the ones that create all of these policies. They're the ones that enable all of the things that I'm going to talk about for securing your devices, securing your data, right? Imagine if your admin accounts were not locked down, or you're not using some sort of phishing MFA, as an example. Well, what's going to happen? Imagine that admin account, somehow somebody's able to breach in and get into your environment. Now what will they do? Now they'll have access to your data. Now they can tweak your data controls. They can go and turn off some of these data controls. They'll turn off some of these policies that you have enabled to secure your content. And now they have Copilot, so they can have Copilot go search across your plethora of data and access all this content. So I really harp on identity, and there's a reason why identity was the first thing that I covered, because it's the most important way for the user, people to get into your environment. It starts from that identity pillar, right? It starts there, so that's why we want to make sure we cover that and drive that really here. So now, of course, I talked also about, we'll kind of shift to now devices, right? How do you secure your devices, right? How do you use the power of Microsoft Intune to secure your devices and provide access to those compliant devices? So that's what I'm going to talk about. So using the power of Microsoft Intune and really have control of all of your devices. So that's what I'm going to talk about next. So really using the power of Microsoft Intune, you basically manage your device real estate. You're able to control and manage your devices. What are some of the controls you want to put on your devices? So because you want to know who's connecting from what device, right? So many organizations have a different set of devices. So you're going to have Windows devices, you're going to have your Mac devices, you're going to have your mobile devices, right? So once obviously you enable Copilot, you want to know what devices they could connect from, right? You don't want to just provide access from any device, right? You want to control if your user is accessing their corporate data, you want to say, okay, only allow access from, say, a compliant device, right? So using the power of Microsoft Intune, you're able to bring that management back to your hands. You're able to manage that device, push configuration, push policies, push apps to those devices, and also enforce your device compliance, right? BitLocker, enable BitLocker on your devices. So your data on that device, especially they're accessing this sensitive data, your data is encrypted. So if somehow that user's corporate device gets confiscated, somebody tries to log in, they can't, because that data is encrypted and they have to log in with, Windows Hello for Business PIN in order to get into the device in the first place, right? So making sure you have control of your device is absolutely critical, right? And then from there, obviously, for your BYOD scenario, there's other tools and capabilities. And in a subsequent webinar, we'll talk about some of the capabilities with Defender for Cloud Apps and how you can do things like session policies to, control BYOD and unmanaged devices, right? But in this case, right, we're looking at managed devices, right? We're enforcing that, device compliance and saying, okay, I want to only allow access. So earlier I talked about, conditional access, and I mentioned how you can, in conditional access, you can say, oh, for this application, as they're logging in, require a compliant device prior to connecting. So prior to doing that, you set up Microsoft Intune, you bring your devices in, and you push those configuration, those settings, lock that down. Once you have a compliant device, then you securely provide access. So that's where, you bring in the power of Microsoft Intune to perform that. Now, there's multiple ways to get devices into Entra ID, and I won't go in too much detail about these areas, but I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of the types of join capabilities. So from hybrid join for customers who have on-premise Active Directory, you can use Microsoft Entra Hybrid Join. For customers who don't have an Active Directory, you can also go native Entra Join and join your devices directly to Entra ID and have them Entra ID join. And then for your BYOD scenarios and for devices, there's also Microsoft Entra Register, where the device is registered, but it's not necessarily joined to your Entra ID. So you provide different access depending on the way that your device is actually joined. So these are very important. I won't go into too much detail in this webinar. We'll have subsequent webinars where we talk more in depth on devices, but I want to make sure that I mention some of those capabilities to you as far as your devices go, right? And I talked about device compliance and how you enforce that through conditional access, right? So you can see here in this policy here, it's showing that I'm going to grant access, but I'm going to require the device to be marked as compliant. Now, obviously, if it's a BYOD device, right? You can't just say make it compliant because, hey, I don't own that device, I don't manage it, so I can't enforce this. But for your corporate managed devices, for those sensitive apps, or maybe for anything accessing corporate data, you're going to require that device compliance, right? So once the device joins Entra ID, becomes managed by Microsoft Intune, right? These are two steps, right? First is joining Entra ID, then it's being managed by Microsoft Intune. Then from there, I push all these configuration, I push all these policies, then I check for compliance, right? I make sure that the device is compliant, meets my organization need. If that happens, then I allow access. So once I grant access, I know I'm giving access to that secure device. So if my user starts using Copilot and they start accessing secure and sensitive content, I know what device they're connecting from, so I can see all of that. That's why we mentioned devices, right? We mentioned how important that is. So, and we haven't even got to data security, and that's what I'll cover next, but this is what, where device security is very important. So here, I'm just going to quickly just showcase a quick demo here where I'm going to show what happens if a user, let's say, connects from a non-compliant device. So here we have a user, Alan, who's authenticating. They're on their BYOD device, right? And they're trying to access the environment, and they think, they perform MFA. They, log in. Once they perform that MFA, they assume that they're going to be able to log in. So once they actually do that, they get a message saying, hey, your devices must comply with my organization compliance requirements. So they're not able to log in because in this case, the user is connecting from a personal device, which is not compliant. So this is how you use the power of conditional access and use the power of Microsoft Intune to basically enforce a compliant device and not allow sign-in from that BYOD device. So I just wanted to quickly show you an example so you can see what happens from the end user perspective when that happens. All right, so now we'll kind of move ahead. So securing your data, John mentioned this a couple of times, how do you protect that data? So, we looked at protecting your identities, we looked at protecting your devices. Now, how do you bring in that device and data security into the mix? Now, this is where we use the power of Microsoft Purview to bring that data security into your environment. How we use, Microsoft Purview's information protection capabilities, how we use data loss prevention capabilities, and in our subsequent webinar, we'll go more in depth on more advanced capabilities with Microsoft Purview. And today we're going to kind of focus on those, first couple of pillars: information protection and data loss prevention. So there are a lot of options to securing our data. So we talked about, how to use Microsoft 365 Copilot with the E3 license and what are some of the capabilities you have with Purview. And for customers here who have E5, there's more advanced capabilities. And we'll talk a lot about more of that in our webinar part 2 series, where we'll dive deeper into some of the E5 capabilities and more advanced data security capabilities you have. And we'll talk about that in our subsequent webinar. So yeah, using the power of Microsoft 365 Copilot and Purview is, how you bring that security in your data security. So John mentioned a lot, right? When the user is accessing their, Copilot and they're accessing to search something, it basically uses that user's permission. So think about it this way: anything the user has access to on their own, and if they could search it and they have permission to a site, you're giving Copilot that capability to basically search that content and return those results, right? So that's where, you use the power of Microsoft Purview to really lock down that data and to really bring those data security components into the mix to really provide that data security into your environment. So using the power of Microsoft Purview, you secure and govern Copilot, right? You bring those permissions, right? So many organizations kind of come in and say, hey, I want to go with Copilot, but, I have a lot of data. I don't know how my SharePoint sites are configured. I don't have my data classified yet. I don't know where I have data. How do I, apply some layer of protection, right? Permissioning is important. So it's going to honor your permissions, right? Whatever permissions you have on those sites. But, that's great. But what happens if, I'll give you a great example here. What happens if you have your SharePoint site secure? It's secure in a site, but all of a sudden now this user gets that data and copies it to a site that everybody else has access to. Imagine you have a public intranet site and there's this very sensitive document, and whether inadvertently or by intent, somebody gets that document and copies to a site that now everybody else has access to. Imagine there is no protection on that file that the user copied. Now all of a sudden I tell it to run a search and Copilot's like, oh, there's this site. I'm going to give it a very sensitive prompt, say, hey, what's the salary information for this ex-employee, or what's the, who owns this, or something very sensitive. And that document now, instead of being in this site that it was permissioned and locked down, it's in a public site. Copilot's like, well, now I can search it, and I can search it, and I can return the results to the user. And John mentioned security by obscurity, right? Meaning, if I don't have Copilot, I don't know how to probably find it. So it's probably secure because it's hard for me to get that data. Well, now when you bring in Copilot, John, you made a great analogy about the tiger. You unleash that tiger. It's like, oh, all this data is indexed now, and you're telling me to search it. If it's open for me to search, I can go and grab that data. So this is why I drive the importance of data security, and I'm going to kind of talk about how you can protect that file and make sure you protect it no matter where it goes, right? As that document travels in your environment, that document will be secure. So even if somebody copied it to a SharePoint site that's no longer secure, even if you tell Copilot to search it, it can't, because you as a user will not have access to it. So now, Purview has a lot of tools, has a lot of features, and a lot of solutions. And we won't dive into all of these areas in today's webinar, but we're going to, talk about information protection a lot. We're going to talk about data loss prevention. There's additional capabilities, right, with data lifecycle management and retention, how to retain that data. There's 4 important pillars, and I'll talk about it next, and how you can use these different tools and capabilities with Microsoft Purview. So along with that, there's insider risk management to detect insider risks in your environment. And how you can use the power of insider risk management to detect those, if somebody inside the organization is doing things that they shouldn't, things like if they're mass deleting files, or they're asking a lot of sensitive questions. So there might be something in your environment that's going on. Purview helps you identify that through insider risk management. There's also things like e-discovery for your legal teams to perform e-discovery searches across the data to look at your Copilot interactions, right? They want to know, what are my users interacting with Copilot? What are the types of prompts they're putting in, right? So that's important, because somebody might be like asking a lot of sensitive content. Maybe you want to look at their interactions. What are they asking Copilot, right? Are they asking it very sensitive content? Why that's very important. So e-discovery helps you kind of all identify that and put that data on hold. So if there's like a forensics or there's something going on and you want to put that data on hold, or you want to put it on, just to identify what's going, you can use the power of e-discovery to kind of do that. There's also things like communication compliance, compliance manager, compliance score, and also if you have third-party data using like data catalog, data map, things like that. So a lot of tools and capabilities with Microsoft Purview, and we'll kind of dive into, some of those in today's webinar. So just kind of wanted to introduce you to the 4 major pillars for Purview. So first and most important thing, right? You might ask yourself, okay, let's go protect that data. Let's go prevent data loss, right? We mentioned a lot of those areas, but the first and most important thing is, number 1, knowing your data, right? Because you don't know what to protect if you don't know your data, right? So it's very important. And we have a lot of capabilities where we help you first analyze and really classify and know your data. That's very, very important for you to start with that before you can go in and say, okay, let's apply these labels, let's apply these protections. Well, what do we even have? What are our SharePoint sites? What are the data we have? It's very important that you first look at that, right? Once you know your data, then you can look at protecting that data, right? Once you have things organized, you have things classified, I have this sensitive data in this HR site, or I have this sales team that's maybe public facing that I don't need to lock down. So I classify that. So, and then I have this like IT, so only IT can access this, or I have this, corporate side where only corporate users should have access to. Once you identify that and you know that data, then you could go and actually protect that data. And then from there, once you protect that data, then you prevent data loss. So John showed some great examples of how you can apply, data loss, right? How you can apply data loss prevention policies to prevent data leaving the organization. So if my user copies and attaches a file that's, say, has a specific label that has a high confidence label as an example, and tries to send it out via email, data loss will come in and say, nope, I'm sorry, you can't send that out. We'll send a policy tip for the user and say, sorry, you're not allowed to do this. Your organization doesn't allow it. Now, you might ask, well, okay, if I lock down the file, why do I care if I have data loss? Well, to me, I always look at defense in depth, right? That's very important. You want to apply security at all layers, right? Even though I'm locking that file, even though I added a label on that file that even if that data left my organization, somebody tried to open it, they can't. Well, that's great, but still I still want to prevent that file from leaving because maybe it has a specific name on the file, even though they might not access the contents of the file. Maybe that name on the file gives out some sort of information. Maybe it's a project that I'm working on, as an example. It's a very super sensitive project. Many organizations work on like projects that have these code names, right? And it might be on the file. It might say Project X, right? And imagine maybe the content inside is sensitive, but even the name of the file they see might throw things off, right? So it's very important that you look at both information protection and data loss and kind of use them hand in hand to provide enhanced security. Once you do that, then you can govern your data, right? Then you can, governing data is protecting that. How much of that data do you want to keep? What's your timing, right? Maybe I've had organizations that want to protect data for 3 years, some that want to hold it indefinitely, right? That's when, after you know your data, you protected it, you applied that protection, you prevented that data loss, now you govern your data. So it's a holistic approach, kind of looking at Microsoft Purview and looking at all these pillars. So we talked about information protection and protecting the data, preventing overexposure, right? So using the power of information protection, using the power of sensitivity labels, and I'll show you some examples and I'll show you how you apply those sensitivity labels. So sensitivity labels really bring in the power into brings that power and that data security component into the mix. So as users are searching files, so let's say even if I have permission on this SharePoint site that I have access to, but that file, let's say, had a specific sensitivity label called highly confidential, and that sensitivity label only allows certain members of the team to have access to it. So if I try to open that file, if I try to even copy that file, or if that file, no matter where it goes, I personally won't have access to it. And on top of that, if I tell Copilot to run a search, or I say, hey, bring me this information, that file now has this confidential label on it. So Copilot is not able to get into that file and access it because I can't access this. That means Copilot, of course, can access it as well. So that's where bringing the power of information protection and labeling is very, very important, because Copilot inherits that security and of that sensitivity label. So if I have view-only capabilities on that file, and I tell Copilot, hey, summarize that file for me, it can't. The reason being is because I only had view-only access. So Copilot can't extract any information. So there's a specific permission called extract data, right? If I don't have that permission, that means Copilot also, on my behalf, doesn't have that access. So it can't extract information from that file and tell me and summarize that for me, right? So that's where using the proper labeling is very, very important. So we looked at your data, right? We know that data, we know what data you have. Now we apply this protection with information protection, right? And there's a lot of ways to classify data, right? There's built-in labeling and protection. And I'll show you how you can apply these labels manually, right? How you can publish these labels for end users and how they can apply those labels manually to this content, right? In our subsequent webinar, there's a lot of also auto labeling capabilities where you as an organization can automatically apply a default label to, say, a SharePoint document library, or you can do it on the client level, meaning once the user creates a file, it will either enforce them to apply a label or it'll automatically apply a label. Or based on sensitive information types, if it detects that there's credit card or sensitive information, it will automatically apply a specific sensitivity label on that file. So the great part is it's built into your Microsoft 365 apps, whether you're using, Word, Outlook, PowerPoint, right? Or you're using the web, and either it's on Windows or Mac OS, it's built into Microsoft 365. So it really makes adoption of those labels very easy for the users, right? So adoption is very, very important. And when we doing, a lot of engagements, we bring in that adoption and change management, because it's very important that from an IT perspective, you might create all these labels, but for the end user, they don't know what a sensitivity label is. They don't know when to apply what, right? So it's really important that you educate your users to apply the proper labeling on these files. And organizations might start with initially not applying security. You can use the label for labeling only, right, to classify your data, right? And then after data is properly classified, then you go back and apply that encryption, you apply that protection. So sensitivity labels allow you to not only do things like content marking, right? You apply watermarking, things like that. Then you can obviously use it for classifying data, and then you apply that encryption on top of it. And then shortly, I'll talk about how to apply data loss prevention policies on this labeled content. So as I mentioned, automatic label inheritance. So Copilot will automatically adopt the security of that label, right? So as I mentioned, if I have view-only capabilities, and let's say if I had edit rights on a file, and I'll show you an example. I have full edit rights on a file, but it has a sensitivity label that only grants me view-only access. And you tell Copilot, hey, summarize this, it's going to say, I'm sorry, I can't, because you don't have a capability to extract data from it. You could just view it. So if you can view it, great, go ahead and view it, but I can't get data. I can't send it to the large language model internally and have it summarized and then return the results back to me because I don't have that extract capability, right? So it's very, very important that, your sensitivity labels are, of course, properly configured. So, and, of course, we talked about data loss prevention. John mentioned it. And next week, we'll talk further on how you apply data loss prevention to Copilot interactions. But using the power of data loss prevention, you can have policies that say, okay, if a file has a specific sensitivity label attached, I attach it to an email, I send it out. Data loss prevention will say, I'm sorry, I can't send it out because this file has this specific sensitivity label and I can't send it out, right? Things along those lines, right? Whether you do it via email, you can also do it in Teams, right? You can apply data loss prevention in Teams, where if I put specific content in there, I attach a file, it's going to say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to allow you to send this message via Teams because it has this file has a sensitivity label. Or even if it doesn't have a label, let's say that you apply data loss prevention based on a file type or based on sensitive information types, as an example, right? So if it has credit card or healthcare information, you input that into a chat or you put it into an email and you send it out, data loss prevention will come in and stop you from sending that email out. So I wanted to provide I talked a lot about information protection. I talked about labeling, right? I want to provide you a quick little demo on how to apply these labels. So in this example, I have a user here creating a file. They're typing out a document and they're going and applying it. In this example, there was a default label applied, but the user is going through and actually looking at the different labels and looking at what they can apply. So as you can see, very easy for the user to adopt. They see it natively. In this example, I'm using Outlook for Web, right? I'm actually using it to apply the labels, but I can use the same concept when I'm using the M365 app, right? So here I'm showing an example of, let's say a label was applied and they wanted to downgrade a label. It's going to require a justification. Say, before you downgrade, please explain why you're changing the label, right? So that's where priority of labels are very important, because if one is more high priority and one is a lower priority, and the user is lowering the priority so that they can send it out, at least I want to get justification. Although I can't, in all cases, prevent users from doing that, but at least this is logged, this is audited, so I'll know if somebody's downgrading a bunch of labels, why are they doing this, right? And of course, if they don't have the permission to edit that label, then at that point, they can't naturally do that. Now, I'm going to also show you an example here of a case where I'm able to edit this document, but imagine this document was changed. The sensitivity label on this document got changed to a more sensitive data, where initially I was able to edit this document, and then after the more sensitive after a more higher priority sensitivity label was applied on this document, you're going to see what's going to happen, right? The sensitivity label changed. I refresh it. Now, all of a sudden, I'm going to lose that capability of editing that document anymore. I'm no longer able to edit it. You'll see once it refreshes, sometimes it won't be fully in real time, depending on how you have your labels configured on offline access or not. But as you can see, once I refresh, you notice now all of a sudden I don't see any information. I can't change the label anymore. I can't downgrade it. I only now have full-on view-only capabilities. Now, in this case, if I told Copilot, hey, summarize this IT doc 2 for me, it's going to say, I'm sorry, I can't do that anymore because I only have view-only capabilities on this file. That's where the power of labels really comes in. Great part is, and one thing that I always mention, one of my favorite things about this is, versus permissioning. Here, I wanted to also show you quickly, like you notice that it said you no longer have access, right? Because again, the label changed. Now, all of a sudden, from view only access, I completely lost access to that file, right? So one thing I like to mention and why it's important is no matter where this file travels, whether I copy it and then I download it or I try to rename it, or somebody says, hey, you know what, this isn't an HR site, I'm just going to copy it onto somewhere else. I'm here, hey, by the way, this is sensitive, go ahead and access this. Well, it lives with that document no matter where that document travels. That's where the power of information protection is so important. No matter where that file went, the user won't have access because that label is associated to that file. So it's very important, and that you properly configure these sensitivity labels and apply it in the environment. All right, so what's next in the journey to my Copilot readiness, right? How can we help you? How can Revanti, how do we help organizations, right? Many organizations come to us and say, this is great, thanks. I love Copilot. I want to implement an environment in my environment. The security components, I don't know if I have configured. I don't know if I have my identities properly configured. I don't know if my device posture, and I don't know if I'm applying proper permissions on my devices. I don't know if I'm managing it correctly. I want some help to really start on that journey. This is where we come in and we provide an assessment of your existing configuration. We look at all your identity, how your conditional access policies, how your authentication methods are configured. We look at all of that and provide you best practice recommendations on how what are some conditional access policies that you should implement in an environment. What authentication methods are you being allowed? Are you allowing things like more or less secure, like SMS? Are your global admins using, say, phishing resistant and proper MFA? We really help you provide that assessment for you and prioritize all those findings. We look at your data security landscape. Are you using information protection? Are you using data loss prevention, right? We prioritize all those findings and recommendations, and really we help you design that. We help you design Enter ID and your conditional access policy. Hey, we recommend these policies being implemented. We'll help you design it. We'll look at your Intune and we'll say, hey, by the way, you don't have these configuration profiles. You're not enabling BitLocker, right? You don't have a device compliance policy. Let's create a device compliance policy for you. And then from there, once we have that, then we can enforce Enter ID and require compliant devices, right? We'll help you say, okay, let's design your information protection. What are the types of sensitive information types you have in your environment? What is sensitive to you, right? So we look at all of that and we help you design these labels, and we bring in like adoption and change management into the mix, right? We bring that in as required to help you adopt these labels, right? We show your users, hey, the organization has these labels published. You should start using these labels in these scenarios, right? So we help you we help drive this to your users, right? Because as IT, we kind of come in, we incorporate all this security. Now we want end users to adopt it and really adopt AI, responsibly, right? So that's where, we help you analyze and design these policies and really help you roll out these policies to a small subset of users, to your pilot, to your IT users. And then we provide you a roadmap of what's next, what to do now, what to do next. Because, there's a lot of information here, right? There's a lot of content that we covered, a lot of things that you're probably looking at saying, oh, how do I roll out this conditional? How do I roll it out securely, right? Because it's one thing to go in and apply all this security, and then what happens if users can't access the files, right? So you want to do it in a timely manner. You want to do it in a nice rollout phased process. So you're gradually rolling out the security configurations into your environment. And then once you have that there and you lock down your identities, then you have a control of your devices, you implemented this information protection, you implemented the labeling, you're helping minimize that oversharing. And we'll talk more next week about, preventing oversharing. What are some more advanced ways of doing some of these components? How to apply the power of like automatic labeling, so you're not always dependent on your users applying these labels manually. We'll talk more in depth on part 2. So that's where we come in and really provide. After we do that rollout, we give you a roadmap of what to do next, what we can apply now, what to do next, and what you can do later in your journey as you roll out Microsoft 365 Copilot in a secure fashion in your environment. So, and with that, this is our contact information. Feel free to reach out. We're more than happy to help you start on your journey, right? So if you're on your journey, or if you're looking to start on your Copilot journey, we can definitely help you no matter where you are in your role. Maybe you did your you did your security and Entry ID, you have your Entry ID locked down, but you want to look at, okay, now I want to control my devices, or I want to look at Purview, I want to look at my data security. We can help you on your journey no matter where you are. So thank you, everybody, for being here. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you, John and the team. Now we're going to open up the floor for some Q&A. If there's any questions that came in, we want to definitely open that up for you. So, Shane, let's see if we have any questions, and thank you, John, for also coming in, and we'll help you address any of those open questions.
Yeah, I don't see any in the Q&A, but I might not have access to them. Go ahead, Shane.
Yeah, it looks like we got 3 questions here.
Okay.
Anyone can tackle them. Feel free to jump in. Okay, so does Microsoft use our organization to program its large language model?
No. In no way, shape, or form. That is the big thing of when we started creating this, and what we talked about our responsible AI initiative. The number one thing is we do not and will not train off of your data in any way, shape, or form, and we won't train off of your user interactions either. So some of my customers that may be here, they may have shared this with them at some point in time, but I'm going to go ahead and just quickly share this kind of a silly but serious kind of a story with you, if you will. So back in, I believe it was 2016, Microsoft put a chat bot out on Twitter that we called Tay Tweets. And it was shut down in less than 18 hours because it started tweeting nasty things back at people. How did it take on this persona? That specific large language model was there to be trained off of its interactions with humans. And as we're all aware, humans, quite honestly, can be jerks. So it tweeted nasty, quite frankly, racist things towards Taybot, and Taybot learned that that was appropriate behavior and started tweeting those things back to us. So right then and there, in less than 18 hours, we learned our lesson. Number one, you cannot train a large language model off of human interaction, and you cannot train off of the data that they provide, because that data may be wrong and that data may be insensitive, racial biased, etc. So to that end, the answer is no, we do not train off of your data in any way, shape, or form. If you wanted a large language model that was trained off of your data, that's where Azure OpenAI comes into play. You could create your own large language model and code it to be trained off of your data and off of your user interactions. But Copilot is not. But that's a very good question and a very common question. Hopefully that addressed the answer.
Yeah, Yasai, do you have any input there or to build off of?
No, I mean, that's perfect response, John. Definitely, it's very important that you understand that component. No, I mean, that's great explanation, that it's definitely not programmed to take your data, and that's where data security is so important. You see, it's very, very important that you take that security holistically approach, right? Because again, it inherits all that security. So you want to make sure that even though it's not getting your interaction, it's not getting your detail to program it, you still you still want to apply that security so that you can enforce AI, you can enable Copilot, but in a responsive and secure manner. And we're going to look at more ways next week in part 2. We're going to look at more ways to prevent users from taking that content possibly and putting it in other AIs as an example in subsequent webinars as well. So,
all right. So how does Copilot determine what data it can utilize when seeking answers from prompted end users? So when end users prompt.
Yeah, and I could take that, and yeah, that's a great question. So, we talked about earlier that it can access anything that the user can, right? So it's in the user's persona. So whatever the user persona can access. So if I can go and search a SharePoint site, if I can open up a document, if I can extract content, Copilot has that in its repertoire to bring that back in the result. So that's where it's very important. That's why we talked about data security. That's where we talked about making sure things are properly configured so that if today maybe I might have access to 10 or 20 different SharePoint sites that might have a lot of sensitive content, but I have no idea how to get to it. I don't know how to click through it. I can't do it. Once I enable Copilot, that data using the power of Cloud Index gets indexed, right? It's there. If I tell Copilot, hey, return this to me, it's going to say, hey, you didn't know, you might have not known this, but you have access to this site. That whatever question you asked me, I can return that result because there was a file in there that you had access to. It had the answer, and I'm going to return it, right? So if you have that data, if you have the proper label associated to that file, and I tell it to search it, even though I might have permission to that site, that file will have that specific label that I can have access to. Now Copilot can't return it. So it runs really in your context. So anything you can access, Copilot can on your behalf. So I know, John, maybe you want to add something there as well?
To add a little bit to that, so to elaborate. So again, it's the Microsoft 365 Copilot versus the Copilot chat. What data does it have access to? The Microsoft 365 Copilot, as Yasai just alluded to, has access to everything in the tenant that I have access to. So that's where it's going to pull from to provide your information. But this is where the prompt engineering is very, very important for both aspects of it. Goal, context, source, and expectations. What do I want Copilot to do? Generate 3 to 5 bullet points for me. Why do I want to do it? To prepare me for this meeting I have upcoming. Source, where should I look at the information? Microsoft 365 Copilot has access to everything, but maybe I want you to focus on just the content in this SharePoint site. Or as this example says, focus on my email and Teams chats since June to give me that smaller subset of information. And then expectations. How do I want you to provide that answer to me? I have this conversation a lot, and I give this example a lot, so I'm not sure. I apologize if I mentioned this earlier today or not, but I do get customers coming to me saying, hey, how come ChatGPT works better than Copilot? And I go, what do you mean? What do you mean? Why do you think it works better? Well, it gives me a better answer. Why is the answer better? And ultimately, we get to that they feel the ChatGPT answer is better because it's a longer, more detailed answer. Well, inside of Copilot, we instruct. Remember I mentioned about Copilot being the orchestrator? Some of the things that we do in there relate to that TABOT thing. We add instructions into Copilot to make sure your answer is inclusive, etc. But we also tell Copilot to be short and concise in its answer. Get to the point. Don't be a long, drawn-out answer. If we want the answer to be longer and more detailed, we need to put that in our expectations with Copilot. Give me a longer, more detailed explanation, and we can do it. So where does Copilot draw from? If you don't tell it where to draw from, it's going to draw from everything I have access to. But if you, inside of your prompt, tell it to only look at certain information, this is where I want you to draw my answer, that's what it'll do.
All right. Thanks, guys. Okay, so we got this one. There seems to be a lot of security requirements that are needed prior to rollout of Microsoft 365 Copilot. With that, What are the licensing requirements?
Okay, so I'll address that in two parts. Number one, security requirements. I'm not going to say that they are requirements. They are best case scenarios. We want to control that data, but you should be doing that whether or not you bring Copilot into the mix or not. Because remember, Copilot will never give me access to something I don't already have access to. It just finds it for me, even though I wasn't aware I had access to it. So this data security stuff, whether we bring Copilot into the mix or not, very, very, very important. I wouldn't say it's a requirement for Copilot, but it elevates or puts an exclamation on the need for these things. Now, licensing requirements, that's where we come into the chat versus the Microsoft 365 Copilot. So if I come into my little tenant here that has both again, so I can see that tab, I want to be able to kind of talk about the requirements for it. So as I pull Copilot up here, hopefully here in a second, I'm going to see the work in the web tab. Remember, work, Microsoft 365 Copilot, web, that's the Copilot chat. So this Copilot chat piece that has access to none of your internal data, that is free. That's included with the licensing you have today with Microsoft 365. The work tab, the Microsoft 365 Copilot license that natively has access to your data internally that we've been talking today about securing that data to make sure that I don't have access to it so Copilot doesn't expose it to me. That's roughly $30 per user per month. It ranges depending on whether you're a commercial customer or a GCC customer. And so you actually have to get a quote from your reseller to find out exactly what that's going to cost. But I'm going to say it could range anywhere from $30 to $35 per user per month, ultimately. Hopefully that addressed the question. Anything you want to add there, Isai?
Yeah, no, great points. And also, we talked about some of the other security components like information protection, Intune, right, Entry ID, what you can do with E3 versus E5. So we talked a lot about some of the E3 capabilities like applying conditional access, using Intune, right, some of the device management capabilities. We talked about Purview, like information protection and DLP. So you can do a lot of that natively with the Microsoft 365 E3, or, if government would, I think, be G3. Whereas there's more advanced capabilities like things like Entry ID protection for user sign-in risk, which uses the machine learning and AI to determine the risk. That's with E5. Even in device management, there's more advanced capabilities on the Intune side with E5. And also in Purview, there's more advanced, like instead of relying on manual labeling, you can use E5 for automatic labeling. You can use default labeling, automatic labeling. You can use more advanced DLP, Copilot DLP. There's more like insider risk management, things like that with E5. So you can definitely roll out different security components across, regardless, again, with Copilot or not, with the E3 versus E5. So, there's different licensing requirements for each of those components. So.
Right, and I'll just add that, these security components we talked about today, always, always, always important. Copilot just maybe shines an additional light on it.